The morning sun fought to pierce the heavy gray clouds blanketing Detroit, casting a faint, reluctant glow over the sprawling campus of Riverside High. Nestled in a working-class neighborhood, the school was a patchwork of weathered red brick buildings and sleek modern additions funded by local tycoons trying to polish their legacies. The air carried the sharp chill of early October mingled with the scent of wet asphalt, decaying leaves, and the distant hum of factory smokestacks. Students streamed through the front gates, their sneakers scuffing the cracked pavement, backpacks slung carelessly over shoulders, hoodies pulled tight against the morning's bite. The hallways thrummed with the chaotic pulse of teenage lifelockers slamming shut, bursts of laughter echoing and whispers of gossip weaving through the crowd like a living current. It was just another Monday, another turn in the relentless grind of high school where cliques held court drama simmered beneath the surface, and everyone played their role in an unspoken hierarchy. But on the third floor in the physics lab, with its chipped tables and faded posters, something was brewing, a story that would ripple through the school, leaving no one untouched, a tale of pride, power, and a past that refused to stay buried. Tyler Vance swaggered through the halls like a king claiming his domain, his broad frame parting the sea of students with ease. At 17, he was tall, with a chiseled jaw, and the effortless confidence of someone who knew his family's wealth was a shield against consequences. His father, Richard Vance, was a real estate titan whose name was etched across Detroit's skyline, gleaming condos, sprawling strip malls, even a community center with Vance emblazoned in bronze. Tyler wore his privilege like armor, his designer sneakers squeaking on the polished floors, his Letterman jacket, a badge of his status as the star linebacker. To most students, he was untouchable, a force of nature who commanded fear and grudging respect. To the weaker ones, he was a nightmare, a predator who thrived on their vulnerability. Tyler didn't just dominate. He made a sport of it. He'd trip a freshman in the cafeteria, watching their tray crash to the floor with a grin, then saunter off as his friends howled with laughter. He'd lean over a shy kid's desk, borrowing their homework, with a smirk that dared them to resist. Teachers wary of his father's influence turned a blind eye. Who wanted to challenge a man who could sway school budgets with a single phone call? Tyler knew this, and he wielded it like a weapon, his arrogance a currency that bought him immunity. In third-period physics, though, the rules were different. The new teacher, Dr. Elara Thompson, didn't bend to the usual pressures. She wasn't like the eager young graduates Riverside typically hired, quick to please and quicker to crumble under the weight of teenage defiance. Nor was she one of the jaded veterans counting days to retirement, their passion long eroded by bureaucracy. Elara, in her mid-30s, was a black woman whose presence filled the room without effort. Her skin was a deep, warm brown, her hair pulled into a tight, neat bun that gave her an air of military precision. She always wore long-sleeved blouses, even on warmer days, the cuffs buttoned tightly at her wrists, concealing faint scars that students glimpsed when her sleeves shifted jagged lines that hinted at a story no one could confirm. Her eyes, sharp and piercing, seemed to cut through every lie, every half-hearted excuse. She moved with a quiet, almost intimidating confidence, her posture ramrod straight, like someone trained to stand tall under fire. Her voice when she spoke was calm but firm, each word delivered with deliberate precision, leaving no room for argument. The students knew little about her, and that mystery fueled their chatter. Some said she was a widow, others that she'd fled a troubled past to start anew in Detroit. A few, the bolder ones, spun darker tales. She wasn't just a teacher, they whispered, but someone who'd lived a life far beyond chalkboards and lesson plans. Bet she was a cop, one kid muttered in the lunchroom, picking at his fries. Nah, special forces, another countered, pointing to her disciplined stride and the way she scanned the room like a hawk. They weren't entirely wrong, but the truth lay buried deeper in a past. Elara kept locked away, a past that still haunted her dreams. Years ago, under the relentless Afghan sun, Elara had been Sergeant Thompson, part of an elite special forces unit tasked with high-stakes missions. One operation stood out, seared into her memory, extracting aid workers trapped in a remote village pinned down by insurgents. The mission had spiraled into chaos, ambushed, outgunned her squad, caught in a hail of bullets. Elara, then 25, had dragged a wounded teammate to cover her hands slick with blood, her heart pounding as shrapnel tore through the air. She'd held her ground, laying down cover fire with steady hands, her training overriding fear, until evac choppers roared in saving 3 lives that day. The scars on her arms weren't just from shrapnel. They were a map of survival, of choices made in the crucible of war, of moments when she'd stared death down and refused to blink. She never spoke of it, not to colleagues, not to the few friends she'd made since leaving the service. When she walked away from the military, she buried that life-trading combat boots for textbooks, determined to forge a new path. Teaching was her redemption, a chance to shape young minds instead of breaking bodies, to build something lasting in a world she'd seen torn apart. But the instincts, the training, they never faded. They simmered beneath her calm facade, always ready like a coiled spring waiting to snap. The physics lab at Riverside was a stark contrast to those battlefields, but it carried its own tensions. The room smelled faintly of metal cleaning solution and the faint tang of ozone from old equipment. Long tables were cluttered with circuit boards, pendulums, and dog-eared textbooks, their pages yellowed from years of use. Faded posters of Newton, Einstein, and Feynman hung on the walls, curling at the edges, their wisdom ignored by most of the room's occupants. The windows framed a view of Detroit's skyline, its jagged edges softened by morning mist, the city's pulse faint but ever-present. Elara stood at the front writing equations on the chalkboard with precise, controlled strokes, her handwriting sharp and legible. Today's lesson was Newton's laws, and she explained inertia with a clarity that made even the back-row slackers sit up a little, if only out of curiosity. Most of the class listened, or at least pretended to, scribbling notes or doodling in the margins. Tyler, though, lounged at his table near the window, his chair tipped back on 2 legs, arms crossed over his broad chest. His friends, a trio of jocks who orbited him like loyal satellites, snickered at his whispered jabs, their loyalty bought by his charisma and his father's name. "Yo, she's acting like we're gonna build a rocket or something," Tyler muttered loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. A few students glanced over, suppressing smiles, wary of drawing his attention. Elara didn't react, just kept writing, her chalk tapping rhythmically against the board. But her silence wasn't surrender. It was calculation. She'd dealt with kids like Tyler before, kids who thought power came from intimidation, who mistook kindness for weakness. She'd faced worse than him in war zones, men with guns instead of egos, and she'd learned to read the signs of trouble long before it struck. The first real clash had come a week earlier, during a quiz on kinematics. Tyler had been caught copying off Mia Carter, a quiet black girl who sat in front of him, her desk, a model of organization. Mia was sharp, her notes meticulous, her grades earned through late nights and library books worn thin at the edges. She wasn't flashy, didn't seek attention, but her work spoke for itself. When Elara called Tyler out, her voice cutting through the room's hum, he didn't even flinch. "What, you gonna fail me?" he'd sneered, leaning back with that infuriating smirk, his eyes daring her to push further. "Go ahead, my dad'll have your job." The class had gone silent, the air thick with anticipation, everyone waiting for Ilara to back down like every other teacher. She didn't. Instead, she'd walked to his desk. Her steps measured deliberate and slid the quiz away from him. "You get a 0, she said, her voice like tempered steel, unyielding but controlled. "And if you threaten me again, you'll be explaining yourself to the principal." Tyler's face had reddened, his jaw tightening, but he'd said nothing, just glared as she returned to the board, her back straight, her movements precise. Mia, caught in the crossfire, had kept her head down, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her pencil. She admired Ilara's strength, but feared becoming Tyler's next target, her quiet resilience tested by the weight of his presence. That moment had planted a seed, one that would grow in the weeks to come, a spark of admiration for the woman who stood unflinching against the school's untouchable bully. Now, in the lab, the tension was thicker than the humid air pressing against the windows. The class was working on a simple experiment, measuring acceleration with a ramp, and toy cars, a hands-on lesson to ground Newton's laws in something tangible. Ilara moved between the tables, checking setups, adjusting angles, her voice steady as she guided students through the process. "Keep the ramp steady, or your data will be off," she told one group, her tone patient but firm. "Measure twice, record," once she advised another, her eyes scanning their work with a precision that missed nothing. Tyler, predictably, wasn't working. He leaned against his table, tossing a small ball bearing between his hands, the metallic clink drawing annoyed glances from nearby students. His friends egged him on with stifled laughs, their loyalty a mix of fear and admiration. "Hey, Dr. Thompson," Tyler called, drawing out her name with a mocking lilt loud enough to turn heads. "This experiment's lame. Why we wasting time on toy cars? You know I'm driving a real one, right, Portia? Dad got it for my birthday." The class tittered, some rolling their eyes, others waiting for Ilara's response, their pencils pausing mid-note. She set down a stopwatch, her movements deliberate, and turned to face him. Her eyes locked onto his, unblinking like a predator sizing up prey. "Focus on the task, Tyler." She said, her tone even, but edged with a warning that cut through the room's buzz. "Your car won't help you understand physics." The dismissal hit him like a jab, sharp and precise. His smirk faltered just for a moment, but he recovered quickly, leaning forward, his voice louder now. "You don't get it, do you? I don't need this crap. I'm set for life." His friends laughed, but the room felt tighter, the air heavier, like the calm before a storm. Ilara didn't flinch, just held his gaze, her eyes steady, unyielding. "Set for life or not? You're in my class. Do the work." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Tyler's jaw clench, his fingers tightening around the ball bearing. He wasn't used to being challenged, not like this, not in front of his friends, his court, his audience. The class was watching, their eyes darting between him and Ilara, the tension palpable. He tossed the ball bearing onto the table, letting it clatter loudly, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Whatever he muttered, but his eyes burned with defiance, a fire stoked by wounded pride. Ilara turned back to the board, her movements calm, controlled, but she felt the shift, the spark of something dangerous. She'd seen that look before, not in a classroom, but in the eyes of men who thought they could bend the world to their will, men who mistook control for strength. In Afghanistan, she'd faced threats with guns, not words, and she'd learned to trust her instincts when the air grew heavy with intent. Here, it was different, but the stakes felt eerily familiar. Mia, at the next table, glanced up nervously, her pencil pausing mid-equation, her dark eyes flicking to Ilara's scars barely visible under her sleeve. She sensed it too, The storm was coming. Across the room, another student, a wiry kid named Jamal, whispered to his lab partner, "Tyler's gonna push her too far one day, man. She's not like the others." His partner nodded, their eyes on Ilara, who adjusted her cuffs with a precision that felt almost ritualistic. The bell rang sharp and jarring, signaling the end of the period. Tyler shoved his notebook into his bag, muttering to his friends, "She's gonna regret that." His voice was low, but it carried a promise of trouble. Ilara heard him, but said nothing, her scars tingling faintly under her blouse, a reminder of battles fought and won. The lab was about to become a battlefield, and she was ready whether she wanted to be or not. The physics lab on the third floor of Riverside High was alive with the hum of controlled chaos, the kind only a room full of teenagers could produce. The air was thick with the sharp tang of metal, the faint burn of chemicals from a previous class, and the musty undertone of old textbooks stacked haphazardly on shelves. Long tables were cluttered with ramps, toy cars, stopwatches, and graph paper, the tools of today's experiment on acceleration. The windows, streaked with morning dew, framed a gray Detroit skyline. The city's jagged edges softened by mist. Students hunched over their setups, some scribbling data, others whispering gossip under the guise of work. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the room's worn linoleum floor. Dr. Ilara Thompson moved between the tables with her usual precision, her long-sleeved blouse crisp. Despite the room's humidity, her steps measured her eyes, scanning for errors in setups or behavior. She adjusted a ramp's angle for one group, her voice calm but firm. "Keep it steady, or your measurements will be off." At another table, she tapped a stopwatch, reminding a pair of students to time their trials accurately. Most of the class followed her lead, their focus wavering but present. Most, but not all. Tyler Vance leaned against his table near the back, his broad frame slouched in defiance, a ball bearing rolling lazily between his fingers. His friends, three jocks who trailed him like shadows, snickered at his muttered jokes, their loyalty a mix of fear and admiration. Tyler's Letterman jacket hung open, his designer sneakers propped on a chair, a deliberate signal that he was above the task at hand. The experiment meant nothing to him. The class meant less. He was here because he had to be, not because he cared. His father's name, Richard Vance, was a golden ticket, a guarantee that consequences were for other people. He'd spent years perfecting his role as Riverside's untouchable bully, shoving kids into lockers, stealing homework, mocking teachers who dared to challenge him. Most folded under his glare or his father's influence. But Ilara was different, and that difference gnawed at him, a splinter under his skin. Her calm dismissal, her refusal to flinch at all, felt like a challenge he couldn't ignore. He'd pushed her before snide comments opened defiance, but today something felt heavier, like the air before a storm breaks. "Yo, Dr. Thompson." Tyler called, his voice cutting through the lab's hum loud enough to draw every eye. He leaned forward, tossing the ball bearing onto the table with a clatter. "This toy car crap is pointless. You really think I need this to get by? My dad's got me set Porsche in the driveway college paid for. Why am I even here?" His tone was mocking, his smirk daring her to respond. The class stilled, pencils pausing, heads turning. A few students exchanged glances, some amused, others tense. Mia Carter, the quiet girl at the next table, kept her eyes on her graph paper, her shoulders stiff. She'd been Tyler's target before his cheating off her quiz a week ago, still fresh, and she dreaded being pulled into this. Ilara set down a clipboard, her movements deliberate, and turned to face him. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto his. "You're here to learn, Tyler," she said, her voice steady, each word a quiet blade. "Wealth doesn't exempt you from physics or consequences." The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Tyler's smirk twitched, his jaw tightening. Her calm, her control, it stung worse than any shout. The class held its breath, waiting for Tyler to back down. He didn't. He couldn't. Not with his friends watching, not with the room's eyes on him. Pride was his fuel, and he was burning through it fast. Consequences? He scoffed, standing straighter, his voice louder now. "You don't get to talk to me about consequences. You know who my dad is. He owns this city. You're just some teacher." His friends chuckled, but the sound was nervous, uncertain. Elara didn't blink, didn't raise her voice. She stepped closer, her posture straight, almost militaristic. "In this room, Tyler, I'm the authority. Not your father, not you. Do the experiment or leave." Her tone was ice unyielding, and for a moment Tyler faltered, his bravado cracking under her gaze. But pride was a poison, and he'd drunk too much to stop now. He slammed his hand on the table, the ramp rattling. "You don't tell me what to do," he snapped, stepping toward her, closing the gap. The room tensed, students shifting in their seats, some reaching for their phones, sensing trouble. Mia's pencil froze, her eyes wide as she watched. Jamal, a wiry kid across the room, whispered to his partner, "He's gonna regret this." Tyler's voice rose, his face flushed. "You think you're tough? You're nothing. You're just—" He stopped, searching for a jab that would land. Then with a sneer, he leaned in. "What, you hiding something under those sleeves, scared to show who you really are?" The class gasped the insult, cutting deeper than he'd intended. Elara's scars. Those faint, jagged lines were a mystery that fueled rumors, and Tyler had just weaponized them. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of something dangerous, something from a life Tyler couldn't begin to understand. Years ago, in the blistering heat of an Afghan village, Elara had faced worse than taunts. She'd been Sergeant Thompson, then leading her squad through a firefight to save trapped aid workers. The memory flashed, now unbidden, the crack of gunfire, the weight of her wounded teammate as she dragged him to cover the burn of shrapnel tearing into her arm. She'd stayed calm, then her training a lifeline, her focus unbreakable. She'd saved lives that day, but the scars, physical and otherwise, remained. She'd buried that life, but moments like this brought it roaring back. Tyler's words, his arrogance, they were nothing compared to the chaos of war, but they stirred the same instincts. She took a breath, centering herself, her voice low but firm. "Sit down, Tyler. Now." The command was quiet, but it carried the weight of someone who'd given orders under fire. Tyler laughed, a harsh, forced sound, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He wasn't used to this. Someone who didn't flinch, didn't back down. His friends egged him on, their whispers like fuel on a fire. "Don't let her talk to you like that, man," one muttered. Tyler's pride, already bruised, erupted. He stepped closer, too close, his broad frame looming over Elara. "Or what?" He spat, his voice a challenge. "What you gonna do, huh?" The room was silent now, every eye locked on them. Mia clutched her pencil, her heart racing, torn between fear and awe. Elara didn't move, didn't retreat. Her eyes narrowed, her body tensing, every muscle coiled like a spring. She could feel the old instincts rising, the ones she'd tried to bury when she left the military. But Tyler, blind to the danger, pushed further. In a reckless surge of rage, he did the unthinkable. His hand shot out, grabbing her by the throat, his fingers digging into her skin as he shoved her back against the lab counter. The room exploded into chaos. Gasps echoed, chairs scraped as students stood, some fumbling for their phones to record, others frozen in shock. Mia's breath caught her eyes wide as she watched Elara's face. Tyler's grip tightened, his face twisted in triumph. "What now, huh?" He snarled, his voice thick with venom. "Who's in charge now?" For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The class held its breath, waiting for Elara to crumble, to scream, to run. But Elara's eyes didn't widen in fear. They narrowed sharp and deadly. In that split second, the teacher was gone, replaced by something else, something forged in fire and blood. Her military past surged to the surface, a tide she couldn't hold back. Her hand shot up like lightning, gripping Tyler's wrist in an iron hold. His smirk faltered, pain flashing across his face as her fingers dug into pressure points he didn't know existed. Her other hand slammed against his elbow, bending it in a direction it wasn't meant to go. A strangled cry escaped him as his grip loosened, his confidence crumbling. In one fluid motion, Elara twisted free, spun behind him, and locked his arm behind his back. Her movements precise, almost surgical. She slammed him against the counter, the impact ringing through the lab like a gunshot. The class froze, mouths open, phones still recording. Tyler struggled, but the more he fought, the tighter her hold became, her strength belying her calm exterior. She leaned in, her voice low, a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The words were cold, deliberate, each one a warning. Tyler's friends, usually quick to back him, stayed rooted, their bravado gone. Mia watched her fear giving way to something else, admiration, a spark of inspiration. She'd never seen anyone stand up to Tyler like this, let alone overpower him. Elara's scars, barely visible under her sleeve, seemed to pulse with the weight of her past. A past that had just turned Tyler's world upside down. "Apologize," Elara commanded, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Tyler groaned, trying to twist free, but her hold was unrelenting, her training honed for moments like this. "Say it," she repeated, her tone laced with steel. Sweat beaded on Tyler's forehead, his face pale, his pride shattered in front of the class he'd ruled for years. "I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice breaking, barely audible. "Louder," Elara said, her grip tightening just enough to make him wince. "I'm sorry," he shouted, his voice raw, humiliated. The room was silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Elara released him with a shove, and he stumbled forward, clutching his arm, his face a mask of shock and shame. She adjusted her blouse, her movements calm, controlled, but her eyes held a storm. A glimpse of the woman who'd faced death and walked away. "Class dismissed," she said, her voice steady, as if nothing had happened. No one moved at first, their eyes darting between Tyler, crumpled against the counter, and Elara standing tall, her scars a silent testament to her strength. Mia lingered as the others gathered their things, her heart pounding. She'd always been invisible, a target for Tyler's cruelty, but today she'd seen something new. A black woman like her, who didn't just survive, but commanded respect. As Elara collected her clipboard, Mia caught a glimpse of those scars again, and for the first time she wondered what it would be like to be that strong. Across the room, Jamal whispered to his partner, "Told you she was different." The bell rang again, signaling the next period, but the air was thick with what had just happened. Tyler grabbed his bag, avoiding eye contact, his friends trailing him in silence, their loyalty shaken. Elara stood at the front, her expression unreadable, but inside her mind flickered back to that Afghan village, to the weight of a rifle in her hands, to the lives she'd saved. She'd come to Riverside to leave that life behind, but today it had found her again. And as the students filed out their whispers already spreading like wildfire, she knew this was only the beginning. The fallout from the physics lab incident swept through Riverside High like a storm, its echoes reverberating in every hallway, classroom, and cafeteria. By noon, the story had grown legs, sprinting through the school's social ecosystem, fueled by whispers, gasps, and grainy phone videos. Students clustered in the cafeteria, their trays of lukewarm pizza and soggy fries forgotten, as they leaned over tables recounting how Dr. Elara Thompson, the enigmatic physics teacher, had dismantled Tyler Vance's reign in seconds. Some swore she'd lifted him clean off the ground. Others claimed her eyes had burned with a fury that silenced the room. The truth was rawer, sharper. Elara, with skills honed in a military past, had pinned Tyler to the lab counter. Her grip unrelenting, forcing an apology that shattered his untouchable facade. The videos captured by trembling hands spread like wildfire across group chats, social media, and even local news feeds, each view chipping away at Tyler's carefully crafted empire. The cafeteria hummed with nervous energy students, glancing over their shoulders, half expecting Elara or Tyler to storm in. The air was thick with the scent of grease, and the weight of a school transformed. In the principal's office, Elara sat across from Principal Harold Daniels, a weary man in his late 50s, his desk buried under stacks of paperwork, a chipped World's Best principal mug teetering on the edge. The room was cramped, its walls lined with faded certificates, and a single window offering a view of the courtyard where students milled under bare trees. Daniels leaned back, rubbing his temples, his tie slightly askew. "Dr. Thompson," he began, his voice heavy with fatigue. "I've got parents blowing up my phone, the school board demanding answers, and Richard Vance threatening to bury us in lawsuits. That video, it's everywhere." Elara sat straight, her long-sleeved blouse crisp, her hands folded in her lap, concealing the scars that had become Riverside's latest obsession. Her face was calm, her eyes steady, but there was steel beneath her composure. "I defended myself," she said, each word measured, deliberate. "Tyler grabbed my throat and pushed me against the counter. I reacted as necessary to protect myself and maintain order." Daniels sighed, glancing at his computer screen, where a paused frame of the video showed Elara's hand locked on Tyler's wrist, his face contorted in shock. "I see that," he said, "but this is a mess. Vance is screaming excessive force, claiming you humiliated his son. He wants you suspended, maybe fired." Elara's gaze didn't waver. "The video shows the truth," she said. "He attacked first. What does the board say about that?" Daniels hesitated, then shook his head. "They're with you for now. But Vance's influence runs deep. This isn't just about facts. It's about power." Outside Riverside was a pressure cooker ready to burst. Tyler hadn't shown up to his afternoon classes, his absence a gaping hole that fueled speculation. Some said he was licking his wounds at home, nursing a bruised ego. Others whispered he was holed up with his father's lawyers, plotting retaliation. His friends, usually loud and inseparable, were eerily quiet. Their usual swagger dimmed as they navigated a school where their leader's throne had crumbled. In the hallways, students parted for Mia Carter, the quiet black girl who'd sat front row for the showdown. Mia felt their eyes, their hushed voices, but for the first time the attention wasn't cruel. She'd always been a shadow, a target for Tyler's taunts, but now she carried a strange new weight, a girl who'd seen the untouchable brought low. In her mind, Elara's image burned bright, calm, fierce, unbreakable. A black woman who'd faced down a bully without flinching. Mia clutched her notebook, its pages filled with meticulous equations, and wondered what it took to wield that kind of strength. She wasn't alone in her awe. Jamal, the wiry kid who'd recorded the video, had posted it online with the caption, "Don't mess with Dr. T." By dusk, it had racked up thousands of views, the comments a chaotic mix of admiration and disbelief. "She's a freaking superhero. Ex-military." No question. Tyler's finished. For Ilara, the aftermath was a quieter battle. After her meeting with Daniels, she returned to the physics lab, now empty, its tables still cluttered with ramps and toy cars from the morning's experiment. The room smelled of metal and cleaning solution, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. She stood at the front, staring at the chalkboard where Newton's laws were scrawled in her precise handwriting. The memory of Tyler's hand on her throat lingered, not because it scared her, but because it had forced her to unearth a part of herself she'd tried to bury. Years ago, in an Afghan village under a blistering sun, she'd been Sergeant Thompson, leading a special forces team through a firefight to save trapped aid workers. The mission had gone sideways, ambushed, outgunned, her squad pinned down. She'd dragged a wounded teammate to cover her hands slick with blood shrapnel, tearing into her arm as she laid down fire until evac arrived. She'd saved 3 lives that day, but the scars, physical and mental, remained waking her in the night with flashes of sand and screams. She'd come to Riverside to escape that life, to build something new, but today her past had roared back, and she'd answered its call without hesitation. Her scars hidden under her blouse seemed to pulse a reminder of who she'd been and who she still was, whether she wanted to admit it or not. The school board's investigation came swiftly, a formality driven by Richard Vance's influence. By the next day, Tyler was suspended for a week, a decision that sent shockwaves through Riverside's halls. His father's threats, lawsuits, funding cuts, public smear campaigns loomed like storm clouds, but the video was undeniable evidence, its grainy frames showing Tyler's aggression and Ilara's measured response. She was cleared, though Daniels warned her to keep things quiet, moving forward. "Vance won't let this go," he said, his voice low. Ilara nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, on the students who'd watched her stand firm. In the days that followed, she noticed subtle shifts. Mia, once so reserved, began raising her hand in class, her questions tentative but growing bolder. Jamal, who'd hidden behind jokes, started taking notes, his eyes flicking to Ilara with a mix of respect and curiosity. Even Tyler's friends, now adrift without their leader, seemed subdued, their usual bravado replaced by uncertainty. The school itself was changing, spurred by the incident. Posters for a new anti-bullying program appeared in the hallways, their bold fonts preaching respect and responsibility. Assemblies were scheduled, and teachers began enforcing rules they'd once let slide, inspired by Ilara's refusal to bend. A week later, Ilara found herself face-to-face with Tyler. He'd returned from suspension, but the boy who walked into the lab after hours was a shadow of the swaggering bully who'd ruled Riverside. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes avoiding hers, his Letterman jacket swapped for a plain hoodie. The meeting was Daniels's idea, a mediated conversation to move forward. Ilara sat at her desk, her posture straight, her scars hidden but ever present. Tyler stood by the door, clutching his backpack, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Why'd you do it?" Ilara asked, her voice calm but piercing. Tyler shifted his sneakers, scuffing the floor. "I don't know," he mumbled, barely audible. "I just thought I could get away with it." Ilara leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "You thought you were untouchable," she said. But no one is. Not you. Not me. We all answer for what we do, Tyler. The question is what you do now. He swallowed, his voice cracking. I'm sorry, he said, and this time it wasn't forced, wasn't wrung out of him by pain. It was raw, real. Elara nodded, but her expression remained firm. Sorry isn't enough, she said. Change is. You've got a chance to be better than this. Don't waste it. That conversation marked a turning point for Tyler. His suspension terms included counseling, and he began attending sessions, peeling back the layers of his arrogance. He stopped sitting with his old friends who'd drifted away without his dominance to anchor them. He started turning in homework, his answers messy but honest, a sign of effort where none had existed before. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a crack in the armor he'd worn for years. Mia, too, was transforming. Inspired by Elara, she joined the school's STEM club, her quiet determination blossoming into something fiercer. One afternoon she lingered after class, her notebook clutched to her chest. I want to be like you, she said, her voice steady, her eyes bright with resolve. Strong, not afraid. Elara smiled, a rare warmth breaking through her usual reserve. You already are, Mia, she said. Strength isn't about fighting or winning. It's about standing up every single day, no matter what's in your way. Mia nodded, a spark igniting in her chest. She'd later tell her friends she wanted to study engineering, or maybe enlist like Elara had to serve something bigger than herself. The lessons of that day in the lab reached far beyond Tyler and Mia, rippling through Riverside High like waves from a stone tossed into still water. The anti-bullying program gained momentum, driven by students who'd seen what happened when power went unchecked. Parents, once dismissive, attended meetings asking how they could support change. Teachers, emboldened by Elara's stand, enforced rules with a new firmness, no longer cowed by threats of influence. The school, once fractured by fear and apathy, began to knit itself together. Its students, learning that respect wasn't a gift, it was earned through actions, not status. For Elara, the lesson was personal. She'd come to Riverside to escape her past, to leave behind the soldier who'd faced death in a desert half a world away. But that past had shaped her into someone who could stand firm against a bully, who could inspire a girl like Mia to dream bigger, who could show a boy like Tyler that power without discipline was hollow. Her scars, once a source of shame, were now a badge of resilience, a reminder that true strength came from mastering oneself, from rising above pain to build something better. The broader lesson was clear, etched into every conversation, every changed behavior. Respect is the foundation of any community, and actions carry weight far beyond the moment they're made. Bullying left unchecked erodes, trust breeds fear, and scars everyone it touches. But change is possible through accountability, through courage, through the choice to be better. Tyler's fall wasn't just his own. It was a warning that no one is above consequences. Mia's rise wasn't just hers. It was a testament to the power of seeing strength in someone who looks like you. And Elara's stand wasn't just about one day in a lab. It was about showing that discipline, compassion, and resilience could reshape a future. As winter settled over Detroit, Riverside High carried those lessons forward. Tyler walked the halls with his head down, his future no longer a guarantee, but a question he'd have to answer. Mia spoke up in class, her voice a quiet echo of Elara's strength, her dreams growing bolder. The school, once a battleground of egos, became a place where respect began to take root, fragile but growing. And Elara, at her chalkboard equations flowing from her hand, knew she'd done more than teach physics. She'd shown them that strength isn't about power over others. It's about the courage to stand tall, to lift others up, and to rewrite the future one choice at a time.